Today, we're diving straight into one of the most shocking financial disasters in all of crypto history. We're talking about the spectacular rise and the truly devastating fall of MTGOX. 850,000. Let that number sink in for a second, because it's the unbelievable hook of our story today. At today's prices, that single number represents tens of billions of dollars. This wasn't just a simple hack, it was a massive, blaring warning alarm that proved in the absolute most painful way possible just how dangerously fragile the early crypto world truly was. Part 1, the center of crypto. If we rewind the clock back to around 2010, Bitcoin was still this very strange, barely understood experiment. Very few people truly grasped what it was, and even fewer believed it would ever become genuinely valuable. It was in this incredibly early experimental landscape that MTGOX first emerged. MTGOX wasn't actually built to be a financial powerhouse. In fact, the name actually stood for Magic the Gathering Online Exchange. It was originally created as a simple trading site for fantasy game cards. But because there were so few places on the internet where people could actually buy or sell Bitcoin, it quickly evolved. It transformed from this niche card trading site into a massive global gateway as the digital currency's popularity just exploded. By 2013, Mt. Gox wasn't just a player in the market. It essentially was the market. We're talking about handling more than 70% of all global Bitcoin trades. It was processing the vast majority of transactions around the whole world, and thousands upon thousands of people were trusting it with their money. For a lot of folks, Mt. Gox wasn't just an exchange, it was practically synonymous with Bitcoin itself. Honestly, it looks completely unstoppable. Part 2, ignoring the warning signs. Because behind this facade of this supposedly unstoppable titan, things were getting messy. Incredibly serious problems were building up like pressure in a fault line. As the platform began experiencing severe growing pains and these totally unexplainable glitches, users were left staring at their screens, asking themselves, is this just a technical issue? Is this just the cost of doing business on the cutting edge of a brand new digital currency? Well, the reality was incredibly concerning. These definitely weren't just minor bugs. The site suffered from chronic, repeated technical issues. Users frequently complained about severe withdrawal delays. At times, user funds would just completely freeze, locking people away from their own assets. And on top of all that, recurring security concerns kept bubbling up in the chaotic background. So, why didn't people just leave? Why stay on a platform that was constantly glitching and freezing your money? Honestly, it was a classic case of willful blindness. Bitcoin was absolutely booming. Prices were rising incredibly fast, and as long as people were making money on paper, very few investors actually wanted to ask the difficult questions about what was holding the whole system together. They basically ignored the glaring warning signs because the profits were just way too distracting. Part 3, 850,000 Bitcoin vanish. You can really only ignore structural problems for so long before the entire foundation gives way. And the boom abruptly ended. In February 2014, the collapse happened at breakneck speed. First, users suddenly found themselves completely unable to withdraw their Bitcoin. It wasn't just a delay this time, it was a brick wall. Next, absolute panic spread across online forums and social media. Rumors completely exploded. Was it a temporary freeze or something way worse? Then, the shocking truth finally emerged, hitting the community like an absolute earthquake. And finally, within a matter of days, the once unstoppable MTGOX filed for bankruptcy. When the dust finally settled, the truth was out. Roughly 850,000 Bitcoin were simply gone. The exchange claimed that hackers had successfully exploited a vulnerability in their system over a long period of time, which of course begged so many unanswered questions. How could so much Bitcoin disappear without anyone noticing for that long? How would the world's biggest exchange fundamentally fail to protect its own customers? The unbelievable scale of this disaster wasn't just a big loss for one company. To put this into perspective, the Mt. Gox hack represented roughly 7% of all the Bitcoin in existence at that time. 7% of the entire global supply wiped out in a single failure. It's a number that was almost impossible for the market to wrap its head around. Part 4, the immediate fallout. We really have to connect the failure of this digital exchange to the real, tangible devastation felt by everyday people. The crypto world was totally stunned. Thousands of users were completely locked out of their accounts. For a lot of folks, it was life-changing in the absolute worst way possible. We're talking years of hard-earned life savings simply vanished overnight. Naturally, this shattered global confidence. The price of Bitcoin plunged dramatically. It was so bad that loud critics everywhere confidently declared that cryptocurrency as an experiment was entirely finished. They really believed Bitcoin would never, ever recover from this. At the absolute center of this massive storm was Mt. Gox's CEO, Mark Karpelès. He faced intense global scrutiny, and sweeping investigations followed as the public demanded answers. Headlines were completely dominated by revelations of massive management failures, virtually non-existent oversight, and appallingly weak internal security standards. It became crystal clear that millions of dollars could disappear in an instant simply because the platform holding them was resting on a house of cards. Part 5. A permanent legacy. Because out of the ashes of this catastrophe came a profound transformation. This served as a brutal but completely necessary turning point for an industry that had been exposed as dangerously immature. The industry was basically forced to grow up overnight. First, global exchanges everywhere were immediately pushed to drastically improve their security standards. Second, we saw the widespread adoption of cold storage, which means keeping the vast majority of digital assets completely offline and safely away from hackers. And third, regulators finally began paying much closer attention to these platforms, effectively ending the era of the unsupervised Wild West. The single most vital, painful lesson learned by everyday investors was a very simple rule. Not your keys, not your coins. It means if you don't personally control the cryptographic keys to your digital money, you don't actually own it. The exchange does. That is the golden takeaway from the Mt. Gox collapse, and it absolutely remains the core philosophy in crypto hygiene today. Amazingly, what a lot of people thought would be the ultimate death blow for crypto actually became its most important learning moment. The market eventually recovered, Bitcoin survived, and actually grew stronger. But the name Mt. Gox will forever represent one of the darkest chapters in financial history. It was the original collapse that exposed the incredible risks hiding right beneath all that explosive growth. That massive loss of 850,000 Bitcoin is a warning that still echoes through the entire crypto space today. It leaves us with a huge question to ponder. In the world of digital money, what actually happens when trust disappears overnight? And when a platform trusted by the entire world is brought down by failures no one fully understood until it was way too late? Can that trust ever truly be rebuilt? It's a question anyone interacting with digital platforms today really needs to seriously consider. Thanks for joining me for this explainer.